Hello, OIS podcast audience. Happy to be speaking with you again. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob Rothman. I am a clinically practicing ophthalmologist. I spend about half of my time seeing patients as a glaucoma specialist as part of OCLI and Glaucoma Consultants of Long Island. The other half of my time I spend running In Focus Capital Partners, along with my partner, Ron Weiss. We are both ophthalmologists, and we manage an ophthalmic specific venture capital fund that currently contains 13 assets. And we are gearing up towards the launch of our second fund. Today, I am privileged to be speaking to someone who I've had the pleasure of knowing for years in lots of different interactions, but who has actually become a part of my life almost every Thursday when I'm in the operating room. Although he doesn't really know it. I mean, maybe he does, but Ed Timm is the founder, chairman, and CEO of Mobius Therapeutics. And it's interesting that we're having this dialogue, and I think that there's some very germane issues that we will discuss, Ed, over the next 30 minutes regarding the growing importance and relevance of your company. But before we get into all that, I think it's great for people to get to meet you and to know you, and for you to give us a little bit of background. So we'll get into that. And thank you for taking the time to speak with me today.
It's really my pleasure, Rob. I began my career at an old company named American Hospital Supply, long dead, but a lot of history in that company, and people came out of it that are still in the industry. I moved into ophthalmology full-time with Storz Ophthalmics, and they had a product called Storz Premier, and I ran the retina side of that business. At which point in time, it occurred to me and others that, boy, this is going to be the next big looming specialty in ophthalmology since early 90s, was retina. And we were right. But we started a company named Synergetics. We built that, took it public, and I left just before the IPO to keep my shares unrestricted. And then that was ultimately sold to Bausch & Lomb. After I had outlived my non-compete agreement, I looked around at ophthalmology, and it occurred to me that the next subspecialty that really needed to be addressed with unmet needs was glaucoma. It seemed fairly evident to me at that time. I'd been living ex-USA for a couple of years, but when I started doing the research, I noticed there were all these little nascent entities in MIGS, right? And some of the first CDAs that I did were with Aquisys and Transcend Medical. So it tells you how this goes back. The idea behind Mobius is it initially was to appeal to those unmet needs and appeal to the developing market, but there's more to it than that.
Yeah. So you have a long history in ophthalmology. I mean, you've been around ophthalmology companies on the surgical side for pretty much your entire career.
That's correct. Over 30
So where did you get that impetus? How did you decide that was going to be the area for you to focus on as a real adult, as you just decided to, take a career path?
I'd been in the operating room for many years. I mean, for my career, starting with V. Mueller, it was a division of American Hospital Supply. And so the opportunity as it related to Storz itself kind of came to me. And it seemed like a very good fit. I liked the organization, was the right size for me. I liked the people. And what I really liked is that they were taking an emerging market and trying to develop it. And again, it goes back to retina. Storz had a presence in retina for some time. They were the original distributor for the Microvet, the Mid-Labs Microvet. But here they were going to be addressing it with a really high-end product, and it presented a lot of great opportunities. From there, you find yourself at home. I like subspecialties. I like ophthalmology. It's been a good career.
It's kind of funny, I've done a lot of these podcasts now, and I enjoy talking to people, but the recurring theme that seems to come up is that, I don't know if it's the right analogy, but ophthalmology is kind of like a roach motel, right? I mean, you know what I mean? Once you get involved in ophthalmology, you just don't want to leave for whatever reason. And, look, I obviously love what I do, both on the investment side and on the clinical side. And it's interesting that people end up very frequently, especially when it comes to entities that have grown up in ophthalmology, are often founded by people who have been in ophthalmology. And I think one of the unique reasons that that happens, which is very pertinent to your company, is that if you're an entrepreneurial person, you can identify unmet needs. And if you've got the wherewithal and the skill and some financial support and whatnot, you can really go out there and sort of address these. Ophthalmology is very contained space that way. And, it's a very complicated organ, and there's, 9 or 10 different specialties inside of just ophthalmology alone. And yet we continue to hear that there's just this growing list of unmet needs. And almost everybody who's trying to solve them is somebody who's got a history in ophthalmology.
I would agree. I have to ponder the metaphor because that would make me the roach. So
Correct. Well, me too. So it's all good.
But I think the thing that has been most rewarding to this is that I've made my way and made my living by developing therapies that improve the care of patients. If you do not do that, if you have the best answer to the question nobody asked, you will not find commercial success. It doesn't work. The most exciting thing that can happen is when you're in the operating room with an ophthalmologist and they're pointing out to you, this is a problem. This is something I encounter. Because invariably when they point out that problem, if you have the head for it, you start to think and try to understand that problem and how can it be resolved. And you also know things like, what are the materials I can use? How can it be made? How you're running through that entire the R&D and the manufacturing process, because just because you can make one doesn't mean you can make a product, right? And that to me is just about as much fun as you can have above the ground, is to be able to be in that problem solving mode.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a recurring theme inside of ophthalmology, and I think that at least as it gets to, we'll talk about, your company and its growth prospects and whatnot. But I think that having a connection to the clinical side of ophthalmology not only makes better leaders inside of companies, but it also makes better investors inside of ophthalmology. That's how we started our fund, being ophthalmologists to invest. And I think that for, leaders who have an ophthalmic background, I think those companies end up being more attractive to us because, knowing that management has a long history of developing their ideas inside the, trenches, let's say, it gives you an advantage. I mean, clearly, I think that's been proven over and over again. So no different here. Tell everybody, because not everybody knows what Mobius does, what you do, what your products are. Obviously, I'm familiar with one of them as a glaucoma specialist, but probably better to hear it from you.
Sure. Mobius was started, again, with the initial focus being into glaucoma. And I mentioned the whole notion that we believe that was going to be the next emerging specialty because of some of these implants that we saw coming forward. The strategy behind this is to think of it in terms of the glaucoma space, is to think of each one of these implants, some that are currently available, some that are still coming through and in various stages, right, of regulatory approval, that those are the Kobe burger. And when you're Upper East Side walking down Lexington, you go past a bistro, and if you want one burger, you've got to go to that bistro. And each bistro has its own burger. We're the mustard that's on every table in every restaurant. And we're used in their clinical trials. We're specified in their clinical trials. But mitomycin is a little more complex than that in ophthalmology. First, there are a huge number of needs associated with its use that are, because ophthalmologists are smart people and they've recognized, they've muscled their way through in terms of a method of use, it's unstable. It has to be refrigerated. It has to be light shielded. It is transferred to the sterile field in a manner where they're squirting it into a cup, for example, which is ultimately it's going to become, by standard, this November 1st. That's going to no longer be, that's going to be prohibited by new USP standards. So huge problems that need to be resolved with that. When we resolve the problem, we get intellectual property, right? So now we have, I think, 9 or 10 patents surrounding the Mitosol kit, all associated with our resolution of the problem. The other thing we do is that we make it and sell it in such a way that it's economically, it's that Goldilocks price, not too high, not too low, high enough to where we make a profit, not so low that we go bankrupt on it. Neither does the surgical provider. But with Mitosol, there's also other indications, right? My sister and I were math geeks, and because of that, the Mobius strip is near and dear to my heart. And it is if you're not familiar with the Mobius strip, it's a one-sided, one-edged object. And if you'd learned anything in Euclidean geometry, you were told that's not possible, right? But it is in fact a theoretical object. We could actually make one out for you. And it doesn't repeat. It actually is ever new. So with Mitosol, we have a glaucoma indication. Okay, now we move to pterygium. And by moving to pterygium, we really gain an entirely new product. It's the same SKU, it's the exact same bill of materials, but it puts us calling at a different group of people, likely at a different set of sites. And Mitomycin-c is also standard of care in surface ablation, refractive surgery. Same thing, same SKU, same bill of materials. The only thing that changes when we do this is we change the package insert to include the new IFU. That's it. So it's a very efficient model that, like a Mobius strip, it appears to repeat, but it's not. It's ever new. We keep launching into new specialties, ocular surface disease, refractive surgery. We can then extend that model out into other molecules, into other areas. There are unmet needs, we would say, in endophthalmitis, not prophylaxis, but the treatment of endophthalmitis. Everybody understands how that is treated from an antibiotic perspective, but everyone also understands there's real risk in drawing up those antibiotics, because the volume that you're trying to draw from a vial and that you must deliver it's a vast dilution. So by preparing products that are exactly the right formulation at exactly the right dosing, assuredly sterile each and every time, we meet that notion of quality. The same with mitomycin. Compounded mitomycin degrades as 0.1% an hour. If it's in a polypropylene syringe, it will degrade 28% in the first 72 hours.
I'm going to take a minute here and just explain, because a lot of the audience is non-clinical, and the investment side, it's a little bit complicated. But the fact is that when we do lots of different surgeries in ophthalmology, and this is, obviously, I think for anybody who knows about glaucoma, we're probably the primary utilizers of adjunctive antifibrosis. So the point is that when you make a hole in the eye or you change tissue on the surface of the eye, the goal is to try and prevent scarring in almost every situation. So for glaucoma surgery, let's say, when we're making some sort of connection between the inside of the eye and some part of the eye that's not the inside of the eye, we often want to prevent the eye from healing well. And many years ago, it was identified that Mitomycin-c, which is, I believe, naturally produced by bacteria. Is that correct, Ed?
That is correct. It was
so it's a natural substance, right? Is a natural substance produced by bacteria to inhibit, fibroblast activity, part of their survival mechanism. But certainly, we can use it to our advantage by preventing scarring during glaucoma surgery. That ultimately leads to better filtration and better outcomes of surgery. And this is the result of many years of clinical trials back in the 1980s, done with another chemotherapy agent called 5-FU, and subsequently translated into mitomycin. But until Mobius and the production of Mitosol, the way that we got mitomycin for the operating room was we had some compounding pharmacy mix it. It went into these frozen vials that would sit in our freezer, and then we'd have to defrost them prior to use and hope that the concentration of what was produced was actually what we were putting on the eye. And lots of studies also show that alteration in concentration and application times and things like that resulted in different surgical outcomes. It's become a critical component of a lot of glaucoma filtering surgery. As Ed alluded to, it's also part of now refractive surgery. It's part of pterygium surgery, where we're removing growths from the conjunctiva of the eye. So mitomycin has taken on an increasing role in lots of ophthalmic procedures because of its antifibroblastic activity, which ultimately leads to reductions in scarring. Ed's company produces the only available version that is FDA approved, sterilely prepared, and repeatably applicable to the eye. So if you want to use mitomycin and have it not be something that you're producing in a local pharmacy or trying to mix yourself, you're buying Mitosol from Mobius. Is that a good summary, Ed, do you think?
It's an excellent summary. It really is. At the end of the day, it's quality. And by that, I mean, quality is being defined as conformance to the specification, right? Each and every
Right.
time. And the problems we solved, instead of refrigeration and light shielding and 2-week, shelf life of a couple of weeks, no refrigeration, no light shielding, 24 months shelf life, and it just sits on the shelf like a sterile supply.
Right. And I think the reason why it's important for, people to be exposed to your company now, and why I think there's, some increased growth opportunity for you, is that there's a difference in cost between mitomycin you can get at a pharmacy or a compounding pharmacy that may or may not be what you're hoping it is, and Mobius's product, which makes sense. You're standardized, you're, sterilely produced and whatnot. Unless you live under a rock, you must have at some point in the past few weeks heard about what happened to some unfortunate people who exposed themselves to preservative-free, commercially available eye drops that resulted in serious ocular infection, loss of vision, loss of eyes, and even loss of life due to what was ultimately a manufacturing defect and loss of sterility. So there is going to be, who would have ever thought, right? You could put an eye drop in your eye and actually die as a result of it. We just had a new article today. I don't know if you heard that bacteria, this rare strain of bacteria, is also transmissible from patient to patient. So now we're going to have to hope that doesn't start to happen, where random contacts from these people actually end up with ocular infections. But nonetheless, the point is that I can't imagine that the FDA isn't going to start to clamp down a lot on ophthalmic formulations that are being used off a label, especially in a place where we're supposed to be so highly controlled, which is in the operating room. And it hasn't been the case.
Rather obviously, we would agree, but I think the nuance you put here at the end was the operating room. There's a tremendous, and this is really where you start to define unmet needs, right? Because in the operating room, you use a lot of medications that are not sterile on the outside. They're sterile fill, but non-sterile on the outside. How do you get them to the field? Well, any number of ways, but there's always the risk of contamination. In the case of mitomycin, there's a risk of an exposure to a NIOSH designated HD. So the operating room is where we fit. And we're not looking to be in the IMS book and taking over huge amounts of shelf space in a pharmacy. What we are trying to do is meet the needs of the ophthalmic surgeon with assuredly sterile and assuredly potent product.
Yeah. And again, I refer back to, recent current events where, we can see that, ophthalmic formulations, can lead to big problems. And, and we listen, everybody in the world has seen some version of endophthalmitis, right? Severe intraocular infection. That's iatrogenic. That occurred as a result of a manipulation that we did in an effort to try and help somebody. Surgical endophthalmitis. That's the number one, the most horrific surgical trauma that you can basically have. And, we don't know a lot of times where the level of infection was, whether it was machinery, whether it was a device, whether it was an agent that was used, but we're injecting things in the eye all the time, right? We do that all the time. And when mitomycin is applied, it is a highly toxic compound if not prepared correctly and if not applied correctly. I've known people who have used mitomycin in an office setting where we've used it, let's say, for certain minor revision procedures that we can do in the office, whose skin has come in contact with it without knowing, and they've had non-healing ulcers there for weeks. It's this nice, nasty stuff. And I feel sort of embarrassed and ashamed a little bit that for many, many years, we were very flippant about how we got a hold of it. And I think that, the whole conversation regarding Mitosol and the future products that you will produce, really are going to end up being what is likely going to, mandate different standards of care going forward, because we've seen that we can screw it up a little bit if it's not perfect.
We would obviously agree, but I think more so the going forward into the future, it's been a tough slug. Ubiquity, it breeds a certain sense of complacency, right? And incidents such as what you just described is what's happening with the eye drops now. There were other instances that have been published in the press over the years. of contaminated drugs in ophthalmology that have been created these iatrogenic catastrophes. That is finally getting through and when I say getting through to the regulatory authorities, we're seeing movement in the right direction, and it's actually thanking Ja for this. It's had a good effect on our activity. So we believe that the road ahead is not only robust, but it's leading out for us in good lanes.
Yeah, I think, and I think it's interesting, you've talked about future products, and obviously, many of us are aware of some of the future glaucoma devices that are hopefully going to become available, and how almost any, as I've said before, filtering procedure in glaucoma, which is where, obviously, do all of my work, require the use of mitomycin for improved outcomes, right? Filtering surgery performed with mitomycin almost always performs better than surgery perform without it. And having Mitosol as the indication is interesting, because in the past, when no Mitosol was available, we used some sort of standardized procedure for preparation, but still wasn't a standardized product, right? There was always room for error in that case. And it makes you wonder how many of the things that we do as ophthalmologists, we do because of a lack of availability of products like Mitosol. For example, the treatment of endophthalmitis, right? There is a whole list of publications out there of people who've used different types of formulations of antibiotics and concentrations that people are drawing up out of bottles in their office and mixing and trying to create sterilely. But ultimately, we don't even have standardized antibiotics for injection for endophthalmitis.
It's absolutely correct. We would define that, Rob, as an unmet need. No,
right.
No question.
Right. So this is the point that we've done clinical trials in the past where the lack of availability of a standardized product can lead to lack of availability of outcome, can lead to increased variability of outcome, but the lack of availability of product also has guided clinical decision making. And who knows if we're going to have, better outcomes with better repeatable standardized products.
I think there's a reason why FDA specifies Mitosol in these clinical trials. Right. Not only for the existing product, it's for Zen, we were used as that, as a companion drug in that clinical trials, but we know that PreserFlow has a new bite at the apple coming up, and there are others coming forward. Rob, as an investor, you're probably well aware of these new nascent entities, all of whom will have Mitosol specified for use in their clinical trials. Why? Because it's the exact same thing every time. We have a standardized product.
Right. And I think that's going to be important. I think that's been one of the, sort of hushed, issues that have always come out of some of these clinical trials with regard to outcomes and variability of surgical outcomes. But now that we have standardized product, I think things change. And I think it leads to ultimate growth for your business. But tell us about, what's the plan for Mobius? You have equity shareholders in Mobius. I know that because we've spoken in the past about it. There are people who want to see this company continue to grow. What is on the horizon for the company? What do you think is going to happen to you guys? Because your growth should continue to be, pretty significant over the next coming years.
We've really experienced that growth. And so I would say there's two heads to this, right? The one head is down and charging forward and really executing on the things we know and the strategic objectives that we have outlined and we're pushing towards to drive things like USP 800, these new MIGS devices, et cetera. So that the head is down and working hard. The other side of this, of course, is yes, we see ourselves, outside equity investors invest looking for an exit, right? And so we're obviously open to any sort of discussions as relates to strategic partnership, acquisition. The head never turns away from that. It's probably actually time to think about these things because we're right at an inflection point, right? But for the moment, heads down and is pounding.
Yeah, this is what you do is ancillary to almost every single company that's operating room based in ophthalmology. Any of the surgical companies out there that are providing products to ophthalmologists every single day, this would be sort of a bolt-on acquisition. Let's say if you were available for acquisition, that would allow them to increase the playbook of things that they can offer to physicians as they continue to develop new surgical techniques and experience new products that are coming to market in the near future, and certainly as new rules roll out regarding standardization of care in the operating room with regard to these agents. But I don't know if that's happening or whatnot, but it certainly seems like a legitimate path for the company to take.
Spot on. Bolt-on is the operative word. It is in all respects the way that the company is structured and the way that the product offering is structured. It makes a pretty attractive bolt-on.
So Ed, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time today. Again, it's kind of funny, it's like we've spoken a bunch, but yet every Thursday when I'm in the OR, there you are, and even if we don't get to talk, at least we appreciate the fact that you're helping my patients. And look, we're looking forward to future products from Mobius. I think you guys have a great system for making sure that we have standardized products, making care safer and more efficient, for our patients, and obviously making our lives a little bit better and easier by allowing us to know that we've got, proper product in the proper concentration and sterilely prepared and delivered to the surgical field without the risk of, us doing harm. So appreciate all the work you've done, and, looking forward to the next steps for the company over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. It's good to see you. Thanks for the time.
Yep. Thanks, OIS podcast audience. Looking forward to the next conversation down the road.
Thank you.